Great, thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you guys for coming back. Our panel discussion here is on breaking the barriers, unleashing the power of analytics. Now, this is a very exciting time to be in the space, and I'm actually very excited with just the event itself. This is a student-led initiative, and with analytics itself, it just opens up so many possibilities, and technology is really pushing that forward. Giving us a window into data that we previously didn't have. Today we'll learn about some of the key trends that are shaping the analytics ecosystem. We'll explore some of the forces that are actually shaping the way users are actually interacting with data and tools. We'll start a conversation around that. Now, there's a lot of information out there as it comes to trends themselves, and quite a bit of confusion today. So my goal here in the panelist goal is really to help level set on that understanding and give you guys somewhat of a realistic expectation. Now, before we actually get into the questions itself, just a few logistics. The first 40 minutes or so, we have a set of predetermined questions based on feedback that we received. We'll be going through those. And then the last 15 minutes or so, we will actually open it up to the audience. If there's anything here that catches your attention and you have that aha moment, we have the hashtag ABDTO that you guys can actually post to as well if you feel compelled. So we're going to get started here, and we have 4 exciting panelists. They're all really thought leaders within their space. And how I'd like to begin here is by getting right into things and getting them to first start off by introducing themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves and their journey to becoming analytics leaders for their organizations. I'm going to start to my far left with Pavel, and we'll work our way back.
Sounds good. Hey guys, how many people are Queen's alumni here? MMA alumni here? Wow. Well, I don't know how MMA graduates are doing this while completing MMA. So Michelle and your teams are insane. I'm a very proud Queen's MMA alumni. I see Professor Thomas over there. I did my industrial engineering at U of T and did my master's at Queen's here. And I run our AI and advanced analytics practice in Canada for IBM and focused on industry platforms. And we'll talk a lot more about that.
Ozge?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ozge. I'm leading customer success units focused on data and AI at Microsoft Canada. So I have data architects and data scientists working in my team, and we work with our enterprise customers directly and helping them enable building AI solutions. And I've been at Microsoft for 2 years. Was the first data scientist to be hired at Microsoft Canada. And yeah, that's my story.
Excellent. Brian?
Yeah, so my name is Brian Keng. I'm the chief data scientist at Rubikloud Technologies. And what we are, we're a venture-backed company using AI to help enterprise retailers make intelligent decision automation. And this is really kind of one of the taglines of what we do with this intelligent decision automation, taking the hundreds of decisions that people working at retailers make every day and helping automate as much as we can of them using data and AI. And so, we're quite a young startup. We're only kind of around 5 years old, and we recently raised around $40 million. And so we really are trying to take this new technologies of data and AI and bring it to some of these industries that are, have not been on the leading edge of it. And that's what we're really trying to push.
All right. So my name is Wei Qi. I'm a managing partner with Simon Kucher and Partners. We're a global consulting firm. 1,200 people, 35 offices around the world, and our focus is actually a slightly different angle from what the presentation up to this point, which is very deep into technology. We are a pricing and marketing consultancy, so we actually think about how technology could be used to monetize and how to actually make some money with it. That's my day job. I am also adjunct faculty with Queen's MMA program. My background is, I think earlier one of the panelists mentioned that he has an OR background. That's basically my background as well. I have a PhD in operations management from Columbia Business School in New York. And what's interesting is my journey of analytics. It's always been, so because I work for a marketing and pricing consultancy, I think about branding quite a bit as well. That OR it's basically analytics. That was the foundation of analytics, and now it seems like analytics is a better label than operations research, that nobody really understands it. So that's my journey.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Wei. It's a very well-balanced panel, and I think we're going to have some very good dialogue here. The first, we're going to get right into the predetermined questions here. The first question I have for you is that as the industry is maturing and there's quite a bit of trends in terms of technologies out there, what are you most excited about in terms of how users interact with data and tools? I'm going to start with Dr. Wei.
So how do I interact? The question is, how do I interact with data and tools in my day-to-day work? My main consulting focus from an industry standpoint is financial services, and as you can imagine, this is an industry. It's almost like retail, where you have huge chunk of transaction data that's happening. Like, for example, payments, right? And just the sheer amount of data that's generated through payments. And also just your average, day-to-day banking behavior. And so what's interesting for the financial institutions to think about in that case is, well, what kind of information can you glean from those transactions? One recent application, for example, is about understanding the whole customer relationship or this notion of a financial network. All of us in the audience probably have I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 banking relationships, and maybe there's a big bank that you have a bank account with, and you have these smaller digital banks like Tangerine and Simply, right, which is a recent launch by CIBC. So if we have multiple banking relationships, all that data comes in could actually help understand how you actually bank at the end of the day. So it's kind of getting into a little bit like I would say customer level understanding of what exactly we do, and that will come out of today.
Thank you for that. And Brian, what are you most excited about in terms of the trends?
Yeah, and I think that one obvious trend is really just data is becoming more pervasive. A lot of people and a lot of companies, just where they had nothing to do with data before, are really just being inundated with it, either because they're forced to from competition or whether it's just to really accelerate their growth. And kind of along with this trend of data and the need for it, the one thing that I'm really excited about is that users are becoming more savvy. It's no longer kind of big data for big data's sake or BI for BI's sake. And I don't think we're quite here yet, but AI for AI's sake. Users are going to actually start looking, what am I doing with this data? What am I doing with this AI? And start evaluating kind of on a use case basis or a business objective. And I feel like I'm repeating a lot of the stuff from the previous panel, but really starting from the problem and the objective that you want to solve and kind of working backwards to see where big data, where AI, and all of these new technologies fit in. And having users having that demand and asking more than just here's a piece of technology. I think that's where we're actually going to see the change in businesses and even down to kind of the individual customer level too.
Yeah, and I think with the customer information as well, as you said, consumers today are a lot more savvy, right? And as they're giving you information and they're volunteering information to you, they're basic things that they're actually asking as well. What are you doing with that information? What am I getting in return? Also, how are you going to protect that data? So privacy and things like that, it kind of plays into the dynamics.
Yeah, and it's like a cat and mouse game because not only are there companies using it, but there are other companies building tools for consumers to get more savvy in terms of finding the best price on Amazon or even potentially gaming the loyalty systems of your retail interactions. And so it's just so interesting, and that's really what I'm excited about.
And Ozge, at Microsoft, you're right. You're front and center when it comes to technology and trends and things like that. What's exciting you right now?
I'll look from 2 perspectives: professional and personal. Professional, because we work with enterprise customers, government, and healthcare every day. That's a very different story. But honestly, at the enterprise level, what excites me is the very simple applications of AI to optimize our workflow. Like our workflows at the enterprise and government and healthcare, it's so horrible, and we can make it so easy and faster, right? Like, say we're looking at a document classification for hospitals' funding process, which takes like 4 to 6 months today. because it has to go through like 5 different human beings, right? Whereas if we can just use simple AI technologies to classify those documents, then it can be done in days, not like 6 months.
Shorten the
right?
time, yes, absolutely.
So for me, it's very like simple way of using AI and actually making big impact that way, right? At the enterprise level. But personally, I'm really into AI for good kind of stories and use cases. How can we help, like say, visually impaired people using computer vision applications? How can we help farmers to create more produce in their fields, right? So those kind of stories really, really excite me from the personal level. And if we were to talk about technology only, I would actually say quantum computing and quantum machine learning. Because if you look at the last few years, not even maybe 5, how deep learning changed the way that some of the technical adoptions in the market and made huge changes. I'm actually really excited to see what quantum machine learning has to offer, because I think it will be a huge breakthrough if we ever get there.
Excellent. And when you started off at Microsoft, I mean, not just to focus on you, but you took on the role as a data scientist. There's a nice post that you actually did on LinkedIn. I found it very inspirational. And you kind of questioned, taking on this role as a data scientist, because you were worried you won't be able to make an impact or work on real business problems and really make a difference. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I mean, I guess in that story recently, there was this article last week published about kind of like my struggles during being a data scientist. But I think my biggest thing there was like, I guess I didn't really understand what a data scientist would mean in an enterprise world at a technology firm. I was coming from a startup. I was like, what does that even mean and how does it work? And when I realized I'm actually with the customers every day and solving real world problems, and then that gets quite exciting. And that was 2 years ago, and I've seen the change in the last 2 years, honestly, greatly. When I started 2 years ago at the banks, say, or insurance companies, I was still explaining them. I was still doing them one-on-one presentations, whereas today we're actually building solutions, right?
Fantastic. And Pavel?
So great points made. I'll add 3 things in terms of the latest that we are seeing a lot of value in enterprise. Most of the time when we're engaged as a services organization, we're looking for 10x return on investments. So with that context, we're kind of looking at 3 areas. That's a lot of excitement. One around the 3D world, so the geospatial, and in fact, some areas temporal, the 3D, 4D environments, and how can you actually run different types of models to do whether it's predictive or optimization activity. The second area is around near real-time data ingestion and running analytics on it to be able to again, make some action that could save, and I'm mostly focusing at the moment in the natural resources industry, which sort of heavy industry, where one decision could be a $30-40 million decisions, for example. So near real-time data ingestion and running analytics on it is a second area. And the third, I would say, what's happening is actually getting the data scientists out of job very soon, because the automation of data science work, and it's quite exciting. Like things like identifying outliers automatically, or doing a lot of QA/QC work, and how do we move actually data scientists to the next value chain versus most of the folks typically spend majority of their time on data acquisition, searching, and preparation. And all these highly skilled individuals really should be doing a lot more value-added work going forward. So those are the 3 areas where we see a lot of activities.
Awesome. And that was a nice recovery at the end, by the way, regarding the data scientists. So moving on to the next question, one of the trends that we see building momentum in the marketplace is around open platforms. And one of the reasons for that is that it really cross-pollinates sort of collaboration right? And even to the point, and Pavel, you shared with me some work that the organization is doing, or even collaborating with the competition as well. So maybe we can start off by first, let's define what is an open platform, and then why is it important for collaboration?
Yeah, so Glenn is just referring to a work that we have just done around, we have talked to 12,000 global CEOs and asked what's the future, and there's about 1.2 trillion capital reallocation is going to happen over the next 2-3 years globally around industry platforms. And I actually personally took a role, I relocated to Calgary to focus on our natural resources industry platform, making Calgary the global hub. And the major difference between an application and a platform are the following. It allows to co-create with employees, customers, suppliers, competition, startup, or academia. How do you actually co-create? Second, how do you actually monetize data from left to right of a value chain versus wherever you might be ending up at the moment? Third, how do you create new revenue generation? Because the discussion that we are always having, which is easy to get funding for, is it's not a cost reduction discussion, it's a revenue generation discussion. And how do you do that? Is industry platform is a great way. And fourth, and probably the most important, around data privacy, around IP creation, around a lot of legal complexity associated with co-creation, becomes quite complex if you don't actually have industry platforms organized and participants signed up.
And with the competition, I mean, doesn't it create like an atmosphere where things can become costly, right? Particularly with consumers.
I think it's, at the end of the day, we should think about value. It's a value exchange platform, and how are you adding value? And if you don't, you'll simply be removed. It's like in Microsoft, we have a big Microsoft business in IBM internally. My good friend Sami that was sitting here, they have a great Watson business at Accenture, right? So I think the lines of competition and co-opetition will blur. There needs to be, guiding principles because we're all here to make money. But at the end of the day, it's about value proposition to the client. How short, how fast, how cheap can you get the value? If you make that the guiding principles, everything else kind of becomes easy.
Okay. And I'm going to pivot a bit, and I'm going to get Dr. Wei. We had a conversation the other day, and you have a very interesting viewpoint on this. You can share that.
Yeah, so I would echo Pavel's point. And I said earlier that I tend to focus a little bit more on the monetization side of analytics and data. And so definitely when you create an open platform, then you effectively create what is called two-sided market, right? So you have the consumers that are consuming the services and experiences that come out of the platform, and then you have the providers that have to provide all these different solutions or whatever. Earlier panel was talking about solutions and applications, all that stuff. So you're developing a two-sided market, and then how you actually think about monetizing that, it's very interesting. And one application that I've seen is a company that we actually work for as a firm. It's in the DNA space, and they came up with this two-sided market. It was one of the newer ways of kind of handling, all the commercials you've seen about DNA testing, right? So imagine that someone creates a two-sided market. So you submit your DNA sample. That's data, by the way, which, by the way, hopefully it doesn't change, because when it does, you get cancer, right? So hopefully it doesn't change. And it's very different from the kind of data that we're going to talk about. But on the other side, then you have all these different service providers. They can do all sorts of things, right? There's higher value things. So you think about value, like detecting rare disease. That's high value. And then lower value, but more, I would say, kind of a broader applications to the everyday life. Like, for example, how to lose weight in a very customized way, or in a personalized way, right? So these type of things are now happening, and what that has created, yes, there's a monetization angle to it, but fundamentally, the reason why there's value is because it changes your experiences, right? So you're getting services, you're getting value from these open platforms that otherwise wouldn't be there. The other point I want to add to this is one application specifically in financial services What's interesting is, there are different industries, obviously, that will benefit hugely from open platform. Financial services is one of the industries that's obviously heavily regulated, and we've seen that, in some cases, you imagine that in certain markets, innovation just happens because of, smart people coming together and just inventing stuff. In other industries, in other markets, in particular for financial services, it could be actually, interestingly, a government-led type of regulatory reform. So in this case, what's already happening in the UK and continental Europe, in particular the European Union, has mandated, as of starting this year, that all the banks have to open up their data. It's called the Open Banking Initiative. So that allows basically consumers to switch banks very easily. I mean, when's the last time you actually switched banks? Your primary bank? Probably never, right? So what they're trying to do with these type of open platforms in certain industries is sometimes it's regulatory led, sometimes it's just decentralized innovation. It's fundamentally changing experiences and how we actually interact with these type of services.
Perfect, thank you. And Brian, at Rubikloud, you're running you're head of data sciences there. How has the open platform sort of impacted how you actually do analytics from the user side?
Yeah, and I think we had some great discussion on kind of the macro level of open platforms, maybe cross-country, companies, cross-industry. Kind of on a more micro level, when I think about open, it's a lot about this kind of open source software and the open frameworks that we have. And I think it's amazing, basically. All of this revolution that we've had in the last decade or two has been built on these open source platforms and frameworks. And so we really are standing on the shoulders of giants, and it kind of democratizes the innovation, from a small startup like ours all the way kind of to large giants like IBM and Microsoft. And I just want to kind of give you a small anecdote. When I was an intern and we were building some machine learning models, we were building a 3-layer feed-forward multi-layer perceptron. And if you guys don't know, it's a very basic model, the neural network by today's standards, but we had to code up hundreds of lines of C++, very, very difficult to debug, very, very difficult to configure and train. And if we kind of fast forward to today, I could do that same type of thing in kind of 10 minutes with 10 lines of code, 10 times deeper networks, and 10 times more configurable. And if you just think about that, that kind of blows my mind in terms of how far we've come. And so now, like a startup like ours, we really can compete, hopefully with some of the big players because of these open platforms.
Perfect. And just for the interest of time, we'll move a little bit off that topic. And one of the themes that I actually see as a consulting company out there, and we're talking to organizations, is around as they're building up their analytics capabilities. Right? Is it do we centralize? Do we decentralize? In terms of who owns analytics within an organization itself. All right. So the question here is, what is the best strategy for enhancing your internal capacities? Anybody want to jump?
Okay. I guess there are a couple of questions there, but maybe I always say start with first of all, your internal people, right? And look at today, what you have today, what kind of skill sets. Like most likely every company has a like BI person or a data analyst or some sort of person who's looking at your data every day and who understands your data, right? And we all know everybody wants to be a data scientist these days. So, and most likely those people are already taking some courses online or taking some certifications and trying to ramp up their machine learning knowledge. So I would say, first of all, invest in your own people, trying to hire all those PhDs, because trust me, everybody's trying to hire those PhDs these days. And after that, it really depends on the needs of the company, right? Like how big is your company? If you are no more than 100 people, probably a centralized analytics team, yeah, of course that makes sense. And most likely a couple of people would do the job, right? But the bigger you get, the more complex that problem gets, obviously. And I've seen many different, not many different, two different versions, basically centralized, decentralized. Like when you look at the very big enterprise level, You can have analytics teams by like department, like say at a bank, you can have an analytics team for risk management, for marketing, for like HR, like many different departments, right? Is it the best solution? To be honest, I don't know. That really depends on the company and their needs and how much money they want to spend on it. And at the same time, maybe the best idea is like you can decentralize it because your company is so big, which means then your analytics teams actually need to be domain experts at the same time, which is good, right? But how do you make sure that you're not creating more silos in your organization? Because silo is the biggest problem in enterprise level, data silos and such. Like how do you make sure all of those analytics team actually coming together once a month, once in 2 months, whatever, and sharing the knowledge and sharing what they're doing with their teams.
Okay.
I think that's really important.
Thank you.
So Glenn, I'll add something to that. Just if it helps, maybe a framework. We are all familiar with the pyramid here, right? The top of the food chain, where high value add, and bottom of the food chain. I think the solution here is actually reverse pyramid, where the top of the food chain should be external parties that are coming in and out to add high value. And the bottom of the food chain should be things, to be honest, just shouldn't be done at a high cost resource base. And the core should be the internal capability. And that core, as you were mentioning, should be focused around data collection, data aggregation, and domain-specific understanding of the client organization, so that nobody really wastes time. Because it'll be a waste of time for a $5,000 a day guy to come and collect data, right? That should be just done before anybody show up. But at the same time, you want that guy because he's doing a bunch of things in multiple other clients, and you don't want your internal people to waste their time figuring that out, right? So I think there is a framework that we work with clients, but there is a reasonable solution.
Okay, perfect. And just for the interest of time, because I think the audience really want to get your thoughts on just AI itself. And there's a lot of hype out there in the marketplace. And the next question is, as organizations aspire to adapt AI technologies and mature their capabilities, what are some of the best practices to ensure we don't get carried away in all the hype? So things such around responsible AI, right? Obviously data protection and things like that. So Pavel, you can start and we'll work our way back.
Sure. To be honest, the hype, because I have my good friend Professor Thomas over there, I think the AI is the battle between operational research and ComSci. And depending on who's at the table, that's where the discussion's going. And I obviously have an operational research bias, and Professor Thomas have the ComSci, and it's always a good discussion. And I don't know about this hype because operational research and ComSci is, very, very old, established science, right? So good that there's a lot of hype and a lot of funding coming along. There's nothing wrong with it, but these are not things that was invented last year. These are 60, 70 years old science. In terms of ethical, one thing is I think we all should be and I'm sure we're all doing it, but we need to sort of bring in two groups that are usually not in the table. One is the ethics, and the second is actually the policy. My wife is a policy professional, and I keep telling her, in Vancouver, I was there yesterday, we're still working on what's the policy for Uber. And I said, Uber is about to be gone. It's 10 years. So I think the policy folks and the ethical organization should be involved in the business requirements. And that's really what we're trying to sort of encourage our clients. But not everybody's ready for that yet.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the panel? I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, I agree, and I also agree that nobody really is ready for that. Like, I've never seen a client who has an ethics committee yet, or they're talking about policy. Like, I know at Microsoft, we very recently, I believe 3 months ago or something, created our internal committee, Ether, and it's all about AI ethics and policies and regulations and how Microsoft handles internally and externally these kind of questions, right? And now we're actually becoming more strict. Like when our services side, consulting services side, when they get into any AI engagement with a customer, they actually have a list of questions they have to ask our customers. Is this going to eliminate any human jobs? Is this going to create any privacy issues? Like, did you check this? Did you check that? Like, there's like maybe 5-10 questions. And if any of those questions is answered yes, it has to go to our Ether committee. And the committee has to approve the project, and then we can continue. And if not, we say, sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, we can't actually work on this project because we don't believe it's an ethical solution, right? And I think the more companies actually start doing this, it will definitely be better. But one challenge is, I guess, I mean, yes, we will do it in Canada, most likely in North America, but some, like, say, China policies or regulations are not really strictly provided. So I don't know what's going to happen. Like, the question that I always get, well, then are we going to fall behind? Because we're not going to be able to execute on some things using AI, whereas other countries will. But that's an unknown question. Yeah. There's still unknowns in that question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we have Europe with GDPR that's coming on May 25th. They're taking, again, data protection and privacy to a whole other level. It's for
and
them.
And it will come to Canada.
Yeah, and will.
Yeah.
It's a couple of weeks away. And how they're going to be able to enforce it is a whole other question. Yeah. And that's some of the dialogues that are happening, in the boardrooms with organizations. Some are dismissing it. Some are taking the necessary steps. And Brian, I mean, you're an AI, company.
So on the topic of hype, I'm actually anti-hype in deep learning. There's a really great paper by Gary Marcus from NYU about kind of the limitations of deep learning. And, a lot of this deep learning technology, you're right, it wasn't invented recently. Actually, a lot of the techniques, RNNs, the basic concepts of deep learning were like a decade or two ago. And really the only reason why it actually is useful, like we kind of saw in the keynote, is really the exponential kind of data that we have and the computation that we have. And so I think people need to be a little bit more realistic about what it can do and not kind of dream about Star Trek or kind of Star Wars kind of ideas. Kind of on the idea of going along with that idea as well as along with the ethics, I think people don't realize or don't, I guess, internalize how messy the real world is. The real world is so messy, not just kind of in the data that you see, but the interactions and the rules that we have for engaging with people, and that involves ethics, that involves, if you're trading, the limitations that you need to put on the platform. And I think people who kind of bring deep learning or any kind of any one technique and say, this is the solution to kind of all your problems, that's very narrow-sighted, because what you really need is to use them because they're very powerful, but put it in kind of a bigger system that also encodes a lot of the things that data doesn't tell you about, whether that be kind of ethics, whether that be different rules that you may have with your suppliers, kind of in Rubikloud's case. And I just like the whole concept of the real world is so messy, and I don't think people really have an appreciation of that when they're starting on these different projects, and kind of setting the expectations right and kind of understanding the limitations of the technology are really kind of setting the right groundwork for building a good system to solve your problem.
Okay. So final question, actually, Dr. Wei?
Sure. So I think eventually Skynet will take over, but I don't know, maybe 50 years down the road. But so until that happens, I think we're living in a world, to Brian's point about the real world being messy. I think one of the things that I found really interesting, and it's a bit of a philosophical musing, is we think that the whole thing about hype and the whole thing about using technology to solve problems sometimes leads to this notion that you think every solution you come up with is deterministic, and unfortunately we're living in a fundamentally probabilistic world, and just because one solution works in this particular instance, that doesn't mean it will work consistently, so keep that in mind. And one of the things I actually found that's interesting is, as we think about solving problems with AI, of course, there's the big vision, and the world needs visionary people to actually push this forward, and that's why I made that Skynet comment. But at the same time, there are small problems you can solve, and that could actually also improve a lot of the overall experiences. And one small problem I will mention is, so I've been a long time Citibank customer. And one of the time, I'm sure it happens to some of us, you accidentally overdraw your account, right? Okay, so it's a financial services example. So I made a mistake, overdraw my account. It's not because I don't have the money, it just, I didn't have enough money in that account. Okay, so how does AI help in this case? I call in, expecting, I prepared my arguments to get the fees waived because I want to talk to a person to get the fee waived, right? And so I calling, and then it's all robot, right, voice, and says, well, what can I do for you? And then so AI, one piece of AI is speech recognition, and I said I'm calling, for this fee, and then it actually recognizes this was exactly what I was going to do. And the next thing that happened was, I will waive the fee for you. This was robot telling me that it will automatically waive the fee. So if you think about this, now of course you can, if you're an engineer and you're a data scientist, you're thinking, well, how do I implement something like this? Well, first there's speech recognition, that's AI, figuring out what the customer is actually doing. And second is there needs to be some kind of an algorithm to figure out whether you will waive the fee for that particular customer or not once you identify that person, right? And so, but that's a very small problem at the end of the day, but it does tremendous amount of goodwill in that particular case to me because I was ready to spend 30 minutes on the phone fighting for getting the fee waived. But it didn't happen. It was like a 5-second conversation, and I left thinking, okay, that's interesting. I didn't expect Citibank to implement something like that.
But and I know you're watching time here, but it's interesting. The Google Duplex, the first thought that came to my mind is, if Google Duplex is doing that, another example, and the receiving side, so the restaurant operator or the bank is also talking as a robot. So basically, machine and machine is talking. Why are we doing this over voice? Like, I think at some point we're going to start to think about, okay, we have a bunch of assistants talking to each other, just talk, in a different format versus voice. But it is a good example of how something could actually help us. But we should think about, should they really be talking in voice?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah. So anyway, so the conclusion is basically solve big problems by all means. You all want to be visionary, but also solve small problems.
Perfect. So just for the interest of time, we're going to actually turn to the audience. I think we have time for maybe two.
For about 4 questions.
4 questions. Okay. So the same thing. Yeah.
And yeah, you really, it's your time to shine. Shout out.
Okay. Our usual suspect right over here.
Yes, advisor to entrepreneurs. Really want your take on what can be done, because there are companies, I had a conversation yesterday, companies that need the power of analytics that really are in trouble because of the economy, because of the pressures from competition. There's a recognized need for analytics. They know it, the consultant knows it, but they don't have the money because the money is all being channeled to traditional responses to market stress. Any suggestions?
Well, I don't think entrance to analytics is too expensive these days. I mean, with the power of cloud, you can just go spin in any kind of tool, VM, whatever the complexity level that you want to do, or analytics as a service, right? Like, I mean, there's so many layers of analytics for so many different skill sets, so many budget levels, right? I think this whole cloud thing turned everything into democratization, right? You hear democratizing innovation, democratization of AI, and this and that. So if there is a true problem that can be solved with analytics, I don't think the budget should be a problem, because it's not a $5 million solution that you have to go buy from X vendor these days.
Yeah, so most of our projects, less than 5% is actually the cost of technology.
Yeah, and
The rest is actually all people.
Yeah,
People in the room. So lots of opportunity.
That's a good point, because for example, in Rubikloud, we deal with retailers, which is kind of one of these industries under immense pressure from these technologies. And kind of what we see is that they want to start using it, but I think the focus should not be, I need analytics, I need AI. It's really, what are actually my fundamental problems, right? Exactly. A lot of the things that they're doing, the business process they have, are just very inefficient. And optimizing those, whether that's using some super advanced deep learning, or whether that's just investing maybe in a better workflow management tool, is kind of where you should start looking. And so again, I'm I'm not one of the people to kind of hype up AI for the sake of AI's sake. I actually think you should focus on what particular problems you have as a business and understand what technology solutions you can have. And sometimes it is deep learning, and sometimes you need that. And other times it actually is something much more simpler that you can use. And really kind of picking those low-hanging fruit is where I think companies should start.
So we're going to open up for another question. No other questions? Yeah, I think I have one, yeah. I'm standing between you guys on lunch. I'll actually ask one more. AI, IoT, or blockchain? Which of these three technologies have the biggest impact on the future of business in the next 10 years? So if you're to place your bets.
All three together?
That's fine. That's a fair answer as well.
IoT is just another data input to AI, and blockchain is nothing more than a secure data exchange. So at the end of the day, it is analytics, which is now being talked about as AI.
So I would agree. I just want to make a funny point. If you put blockchain on your company, apparently the value will increase. There's the story that people probably have heard, this Long Island iced tea company that basically put blockchain on their company. All of a sudden, their market value tripled. So I would bet on blockchain for the value.
All right, nothing else? Oh, there's one right here.
So you talked about the voice recognition and speech recognition thing happening, and we mentioned Google Duplex. So one of the conversations that's happening is Google Duplex is very recent. So like the conversation that is happening is that is the technology trying to be deceptive to humans? Is that okay? Is that what Google is doing? Is the conversation a human is talking to a machine? Is the machine supposed to be human-like? Or going back to your point, does that need to be even speech? Can it just be some other sort of communication happening? Do you think AI, the way it's going into consumer-facing applications, is that a concern in terms of ethics for one, or actually providing value? Do you see that being a concern, or do you see this evolving into, like you said again, some other sort of communication or some other sort of platform? Chatbots, for example, you know exactly, but voice is taking that one step further.
I think eventually we will get there. There will be this transition of some silly things like machine talking to machine on a human platform like a voice, or natural language. Like if the robots talking, just talk in binary, right? Why are we bringing language in the discussion? But that's going to be a transition over the next 10, 15 years. I know we're running out of time. I wanted to poll this audience for business platform models. Please provide some feedback. I have a poll on my LinkedIn page. I want to hear from you what you think about this industry platform concept as a business concept, because there's a School of Business audience here, because we often don't get enough time to talk it through. So please think about it and then ping me some questions, or just if it just doesn't make sense, I just want to understand it.
Perfect.
Thank you. Just to actually round this out, I think the earlier ethics point, and also where you alluded to, so I come from the US, and all the big fake news stuff that's happening there. I saw on a CNN on my flight over yesterday, was a report. Someone actually superimposed an actor, it was a comedian that was talking about something, onto Barack Obama's face. It was actually, you should check it out on YouTube. And when you look at the superimposing, it was all kind of algorithm based. You cannot tell. You can tell a little bit, but it's not perfect. But if you don't pay attention, you cannot tell whether Obama really said it or not. It felt like Obama saying it. And that's sort of the danger that we're headed into. I mean, I guess the Turing test is still valid for the time being, and we can still detect robots from humans. But eventually, I don't know, the way it's headed. I do have a lot of people, a lot of my friends, when they interact with these type of, even the voice is not necessarily the best, or like these chatbots and things, you forget that you're actually talking to a robot, and and you put all sorts of human emotions onto that interaction, I think where the future is headed, it will be increasingly difficult, right?
And there's a generational aspect here. In fact, a lot of, sorry, I know we gotta go. A lot of Generation X, they actually prefer to talk to a chatbot.
Yeah.
So it's actually both-way thing.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, well, I think we've met part of our, most of our agenda today was really to get the conversation started, get you guys starting to think about some of these topics that are in the marketplace itself. So I'd like to thank our panelists. Just a round of applause for them. So thank you, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.